You see that? Okay, great. All right, so we're going to be talking about letter of map changes today. Everybody that works in floodplain management, typically you will talk to applicants about letter of map changes, and it's kind of an all-encompassing term for different changes that someone can, if they feel they've been inadvertently placed in a floodplain. So a letter of map change really is an official change to an effective flood insurance rate map. So FEMA puts the onus on property owners if they feel that they've been inadvertently included in the special flood hazard area, or if they put fill on their property and they want to elevate the building pad site above the base flood elevation. FEMA allows property owners to request a revision or amendment to the effective flood map to remove a property or reflect changed flooding conditions on the map. So again, if you feel that you want to have a revision or an amendment, FEMA puts that responsibility on the local property owner to do that. Now, sometimes people call me and say, hey, Amy, can you do that for me? That's not something that I can do. That's not something that a floodplain administrator can do, but that's on each property owner to complete this task. So what is a letter of map change? There's two different types. The first one is a conditional letter of map change, where it's a comment document that's issued by FEMA based upon proposed construction or development within a floodplain. Again, it's not an official determination. It's kind of like asking for permission. If I put this much fill in the area, I determine what the base flood elevation is versus the level of fill on my building pad site. Would this be approved for a conditional letter of map revision based upon fill? Or if I have a conditional letter of map amendment where the ground is naturally higher, the natural grade is higher than the base flood elevation, before I do any kind of building on the site, if I submit these comment documents, would this be approved by FEMA? Now, the conditional letter of map revision is for floodway or stream encroachments, where there's going to be a revision to the base flood elevation, the floodway width, or the base flood discharge. There is a conditional letter of map revision stating that FEMA has reviewed the hydraulics and hydrologic calculations, and that there will be revisions to the model, and that it meets certain thresholds, whether or that there's not a surcharge of more than 1 foot around any kind of insurable structure. So those are just comment documents thinking about I'm asking for permission before I do any kind of development on the site to make sure that it's compliant with the NFIP regulations. Now, a lot of people, most people do letter of map changes where it's issued by FEMA that amends, revises the digital flood insurance rate map or the FIS report. So I've already done development and my lowest adjacent grade or my lowest lot elevation is at or above the base flood elevation. So if my letter of map amendment, if the natural grade is higher, if I place fill on the lot, letter of map revision based upon fill, or if I've done development that crosses a stream and there's going to be revisions to the firm, to the base flood elevation, to the floodway width, to the base flood discharges, it's all going to be within the, FEMA is going to issue a new flood insurance rate map. There's going to be a new digital flood insurance rate map, and the flood insurance study report is going to be revised based upon the area where the stream encroachment is happening, so, and where it ties in. Or if you have, let's say, a zone A and it's 50 lots or 5 acres, and you're going to be revising to establish a base flood elevation, you can take that new technical data and have that as revision as well. So why do it? It's less costly for processing and faster than republishing a digital flood insurance rate map. So it allows individual property owners to do that if there's scale limitations. One time in Murfreesboro, I had a condo association where some folks had the requirement to have flood insurance, but actually it was a scale limitation that the floodplain was actually touching the rooftop of the condo, but it wasn't actually touching the structure. And so they were able to submit it as a letter of map amendment out as shown. So sometimes I feel like people have been inadvertently included. They can go ahead and submit that. So as we talked about earlier, conditional letter of map amendment or letter of map revision, again, is a comment on proposed projects. It's for the applicant proposing to build on the property or proposing to raise the property above the base flood elevation using fill. A special note that if someone is going to be using fill, they want to make sure that it's engineered, that there's compaction, that is done according to your local standards if you have that. But it does not amend the flood map because it's just a conditional, it's just commenting on a proposed development. And so a conditional letter of map revision, as we talked about earlier, is commenting on whether a proposed project, if it's built, would justify a map revision or proposed hydrology changes. So again, a lot of times we have Jung that's been doing in-house reviews for various projects across the state. So every time that someone submits engineering analysis, we're looking at that to see whether or not it's a no rise, no impact, or if there's changes in the model, whether a conditional letter of map revision needs to be sent to FEMA. One thing that I want to talk about that we haven't talked about a lot for floodplain management is if there is a conditional letter of map change that's going to be submitted to FEMA, whether it's a floodway encroachment or if someone's just putting fill on a lot, there are requirements for the Endangered Species Act. And the purpose of this is to conserve threatened or endangered species in their ecosystems. So if there's any kind of species that are at risk of extinction or in an endangered area in the foreseeable future, there has to be documentation of that. And the Endangered Species Act prohibits any actions by communities, developers, private citizens from taking or harming endangered wildlife. So part of the requirements for Section 7 requires each federal agency to ensure that any action it authorizes, funds, or carries out doesn't jeopardize the existence of any species as a result in the destruction or adverse modification of a designated critical habitat. Section 9 says pretty much the same thing, but it's for anyone that's doing any kind of private act or non-federal project. So whenever you're going to be doing development in the floodplain and you're doing anything that would be a conditional letter of map change, or if you're doing any kind of floodway disturbance, there has to be documentation to fulfill the Endangered Species Act requirement to make sure that there's documentation stating that there's not going to be any kind of harm or there's not going to be any kind of taking. So for non-federal projects, which mostly y'all will see quite a bit, there has to be no potential for a take existing. So there has to be no potential to harass, harm, or hurt any kind of species that's endangered. And the requester has to be responsible for the potential for take determination, and determination is not required to come from or be concurred by the services. And then if the requester determines a take will or has potential to occur, they can consider contacting the services to discuss potential project revisions to eliminate the take. So essentially what that's saying is if you have a project that's going to be an endangered species habitat or area, if it's going to harm an animal or species, a plant, or whatever is native to the site, there should be other alternatives to where you're going to be developing to try to eliminate that take or that issue. And then if neither number 1 or number 2 are possible and the project has a potential to take the listed species, an incidental take permit may be submitted showing that the project is a subject or is covered by the subject of the permit. So again, if someone's going to be doing this, the surveyor or the engineer would reach out to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Office to get this letter to be written. So for a letter of map amendment, we talked about doing a conditional letter of map changes for proposed development. But once you have already done the development, if you're already, if the natural grade is already higher than the base flood elevation, you can do a letter of map amendment. So when you think of a letter of map amendment, you think that it's God-given, that it's already there. And if the person believes that the land has been inadvertently included, they can do that to show that the natural grade not elevated by fill of a structure or parcel is above the natural, is above the base flood elevation. So again, it's removal by letter of a specific parcel, portion of a parcel, or existing structure that's been inadvertently shown. What's key about this is sometimes when y'all get a letter of map change, someone will tell you, well, hey, it's from a whole parcel. But actually in the determination document, it'll tell you if it's a structure, if it's a portion of the parcel, and if portions of the parcel remain in the special flood hazard area. The determination document will have the surveyor write out where it begins and ends in the area. But again, the removal it says what has been removed from this. It'll say if it's a structure or if it's a parcel or if anything remains. So it does directly affect floodplain management and insurance rating. If someone does get a letter of map amendment that the area around the structure is higher than the natural base flood elevation, then the flood insurance requirement may be waived. But again, it's up to the prerogative of the lender, whether or not, even if you get a letter of map amendment or a letter of map revision based upon fill, whether or not the insurance requirement will say. So it's processed under Part 70 of the NFIP regulations, but it does not change base flood elevations. So this is just kind of a nice schematic to show Part 70. Again, you want to think about the lowest ground touching the structure has to be equal to or higher than the base flood elevation. So you can see here the house correctly shown in the floodplain on the left, and then the house has been inadvertently included. There's natural high ground. And the other thing that we've preached about repeatedly is that if someone's going to be determining the base flood elevation, they should be using the flood insurance study profile to make sure they have an accurate determination when doing these applications. So this is just another example of a letter of map amendment for the natural grade, where the structure on the left is higher than the base flood elevation, and you can see the ground immediately beside the structure is also above. So for letter of map revision based upon fill, this is an administrative procedure where FEMA reviews the information submitted by the property owner that believes that an existing structure or parcel of land has been inadvertently included, and this is where it has been elevated by fill. So with a letter of map revision based upon fill, the structure or the parcel has to be elevated by earth and fill. And the structure or parcel would be outside the special flood hazard area or is elevated above the special flood hazard area. What's key about this is that the property owner comes in and asks the local floodplain administrator for a floodplain development permit, and then to make sure that you have 2 site plans, pre and post fill, to show where the fill has been placed, as well as elevations. It can remove the mandatory federal flood insurance purchase requirement, and is processed under Section 65.5 of the NFIP regulations. It does not change base flood elevations, but if the structure is currently mapped outside of the special flood hazard area, or fill has been placed when the parcel or structure was outside the special flood hazard area, it can be treated as a letter of map amendment. So if you have an area maybe or a community that wasn't in the special flood hazard area and is just getting new maps done and it was elevated by fill, FEMA treats that as a letter of map amendment. So some of the criteria for a letter of map revision based upon fill, again, you want to look at your lowest lot elevation if the parcel is vacant, or you look at the lowest adjacent grade if the structure is on the parcel. And the lowest adjacent grade and the lowest floor has to be greater than the 1% annual chance flood elevation. The community must sign a community acknowledgement form stating that the structure is reasonably safe from flooding. As we talked about a moment ago, if you do not have any kind of information on file to show that there's been fill placed on the site, I would recommend asking the surveyor to submit a site plan pre and post fill with elevation. Because if you're signing that, you're signing that it's reasonably safe from flooding, that the community is aware of what's been occurring on the site. If you don't have any kind of documentation, that can be problematic. And the fill has to be engineered to meet compaction and soil testing procedures. So again, if your community doesn't have information on engineering fill, we can send you some information you can have for your community file. Just let us know after this training. We'll send it out to everybody. So this is kind of a nice schematic to show that there's been fill placed on the site. The structure, the building pad has been elevated quite a bit above the base flood elevation. So you can see that the lowest adjacent grade beside the home is above the base flood elevation, as well as the lowest floor being above it. For a letter of map revision, as talked about earlier, this is typically for streamway encroachments. And it's a letter that FEMA officially revises the current flood insurance rate maps, flood insurance study report to show changes in floodplains, floodways, base flood elevations, and flood profiles. So as we talked about before, we had the Tennessee No Rise Guidance document. We did a training back in December on that. So if you guys want to take a look at that, there is a YouTube video that's fun to watch. And the request that proposes updates to the flood map is a conditional letter of map revision, or simply a conditional letter map revision. So again, it's kind of like asking for permission. So whenever someone is going to be doing an encroachment to a stream, they have to do an engineering analysis. If there's any kind of changes in the model, they have to do a conditional letter of map revision. Once the bridge, the structure, the fill is as built, then they're going to follow up to revise the flood insurance rate map, flood insurance study profiles, and they're going to be doing that as a letter of map revision. So again, just some of the types of things that you can see is floodway development in a Zone AE without floodways, Zone A streams, unmapped streams. So any kind of development that encroaches a stream has to have an engineering analysis. So if it's a driveway, culvert, different things like that. So if you guys have any questions, just let me know, because I get questions every day about it. So when we look at the schematic here, you'll notice that the structure is 100% over water. So that is not eligible for a letter of map amendment or a letter of map revision based on fill. When I was becoming the state coordinator and I was having training from Stan, he told me that if a structure was 100% over water and you could walk out the door and spit and hit water, that it wasn't eligible for a letter of map change. So I still think about that 7 years later. But anyway, this is just good schematic that if you have a house that's over water, it's not eligible for a letter of map change. So again, there's some other different kind of letter of map change. You can have a letter of map change removal that shows the lowest elevation of the parcel or structure has to be equal to or above the base flood elevation at that location. You have a letter of map amendment out as shown to say that the parcel or structure is completely outside a special flood hazard area when plotted on the panel. Again, sometimes there can be scaling error if you're taking a 3D image and trying to put it on a 2D map. Sometimes there's scaling issues. You can have a non-removal denial where the lowest elevation, the parcel or the structure, is below the base flood elevation at that location. When I first started this job, I had a gentleman that called me. His surveyor submitted a letter of map revision based upon fill four different times to FEMA, and it was denied. So the surveyor kept telling the property owner, oh, it'll get approved, oh, it'll get approved. When I looked at the determination document, the lowest adjacent grade was below the base flood elevation. It would never get approved. So again, if someone is submitting this documentation to FEMA, the surveyor should be looking at the elevation certificate, looking at the lag versus a base flood elevation. If it's below, it should not be submitted to FEMA. And then there can be an inadvertent inclusion where the parcel or the structure is depicted in the floodway, but the natural grade elevations prove that it's equal to or above the base flood elevation. So sometimes you'll see that where a structure is in the cross-hatched area of the floodway, but the ground elevations show that it's way above. You typically see this a lot of times along the Tennessee River, like in Hardin County. Sometimes you have the floodway, and then it's the stream bank kind of has a steep incline and it's up on rocks, and some of those areas are in a floodway, but they're physically due to height and elevation out. So floodplain administrator responsibility, letter of map changes that you receive from FEMA, you'll receive a determination document. As we talked about earlier this year, we sent out an email where y'all can get a subscription to FEMA. So when there are letter of map changes, You can get an email and see what has been done in your community. I get those every month, and I can see some that have been approved and some that have been denied statewide. They used to send paper copies, but now they just do electronically. After this, we'll send out the instructions if you haven't got that subscription to do that. So whether it's a letter of map amendment or it's a letter of map revision based upon fill, it's kind of like what can sink your battleship, right? So if the lowest adjacent grade, if the structure is already there, or the lowest lot elevation, if a parcel is vacant, has to be greater than the base flood elevation. If you don't have those two things based upon the application, it will be denied. So again, you always want to look if the structure is there, is the lag at or above the base flood elevation, and if it's vacant, is the lowest lot elevation above the base flood elevation. If you can say yes to either one of those, you'll have a successful application. If you say no, then it will be denied by FEMA. So this is just an example. We just wanted to show a letter of map revision based upon fill. As we talked about many times, and I've talked about even more, is that if someone's bringing fill into a site, they should be getting a floodplain development permit and then also having two site plans. So there should be a pre-fill that delineates the location of the fill with elevations, and then there should also be a site plan post-fill to delineate the location of the fill with the elevation, so you can see what it was before any fill was brought in versus after. And there should be elevation information on the site plan so that you know. Because whenever they're submitting it to FEMA, the more information they can show, the better to help the application. So when we talk about letter of map changes and a community, someone has submitted a letter of map change to FEMA, this is what a determination document looks like. You can see here in the upper right-hand corner that there's a LOMA, so it tells you it's a letter of map amendment. And then as you can see a little bit farther down, you can see letter of map amendment determination document, and it says in parentheses removal. That means that it was successful, that something was removed from the special flood hazard area. So if you drop down a little bit farther down, you'll see the word determination, and then below that you'll see outcome, what is removed from the special flood hazard area. And then you'll see that it's a structure and has a street address, and you'll see that. The other thing, you'll see the little blue bubble that says that portions remain in the special flood hazard area. So sometimes you guys will have someone that'll come in and they'll get their structure removed from the special flood hazard area, and then they'll want to build a she shed or a garage or something else on the property. And they'll come in and they'll argue with you until they're blue in the face and say, hey, my whole entire lot was removed. But as you can see from this determination document, that only the structure was removed. So there's still portions of the parcel that remain in the floodplain that would fall under the NFIP regulations. So you want to make sure that when someone comes in and they have a question, that you actually read and review these documents before you issue permits or say that someone doesn't have to follow the NFIP regulations. If you have questions, sometimes these can be confusing. You can always just call and say, hey, Amy, what does this mean? So when we were preparing for this presentation, we were talking to the MT1 group and the FMIX group. We're talking about how whenever there's a denial of a letter of map change, it would be really nice if they would have a red rubber stamp that says denied, but they don't. So there's a couple things that you can see here that show that it has been denied. So up in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the letter of map revision -DEN for denied. So whenever someone has been denied, it has that DEN. And then you can also see for the letter of map revision based upon fill for the determination document, it has non-removal, which means nothing has been removed. So another trigger that you can see down below is if you look at the 1% annual chance flood elevation, if you look at the base flood elevation, it's 676.1, and the lowest adjacent grade to the ground beside the house is 675.7. So you can see that it's off by 0.4 of a foot. So that's another way that you can look at that to see if it has been denied. You can also notice down below, if you look under the box that says lot, that they were trying to do lots 1A through 1F under Corporate Image West subdivision. So you can see that it wasn't just one structure, it was more than one. So all of those have been denied. This is something that you also want to pay attention if you have something that's been a phased development, because sometimes the developer can be confused, or if they're doing a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, they get confused on what's been removed versus what has not. So again, it's really crucial that you can see what's been submitted and what has been denied or approved. So you can see that right here. And I'm sure Regina's loving me because I have a Hamilton County example. So sometimes you'll see under the additional considerations that portions remain in the floodway, portions remain in the special flood hazard area. So what do? You can contact the FEMA Mapping Information Exchange to ask for the case file to see what was removed versus what remains in the special flood hazard area. So there are avenues that, unfortunately, when you get the determination document, they do not necessarily have a way that you can go back and look through the whole application package to see what was removed versus what remains. So you do have to contact them and ask for the case file. And then they'll probably go through instructions today on how to do that. But again, you may have to do a little bit of extra work and ask for a little bit of patience and a little bit of time to be able to do that and review it. So as we talked about record keeping, if you go to the FEMA Map Service Center website, if you're ever trying to look up your letter of map changes, you would just, do the search all Tennessee, Haywood County, and Haywood County unincorporated areas. And then when you click on the affected products, you can see that they've had 3 letter of map amendments or letter of map revision based upon fill. And you see it's from 2014 and 2019. As we talked about earlier, you do want to have these on file. So if someone calls and let's say they're selling their house and they need a copy of that, that you have it handy. My best friend in Ohio, she bought a house that had a letter of map amendment for the house, but she couldn't find it for the garage. And her realtor didn't know how to find it. So she called me and said, "Hey, Amy, can you help me?" And so I was able to find that she had 1 letter of map amendment for the house and 1 letter of map amendment for the garage. So there are different ways that you can look it up, but you want to make sure that you have these on file. So in case you're on vacation and somebody's calling your colleague saying, "Hey, I need it," that they're easily retrievable, whether you do it by address or by subdivision or however you want to designate those files and organize those files is fine, but you just want to make sure that you have them easy and retrievable when you have information requests. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, so we'll let the FEMA folks go next.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to invite Erin Walhout. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, and Matt Reed. You can you can unmute yourselves and share from the top of the screen.
Great, thank you. So everyone be able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, great.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Reed. I am a senior manager with the FEMA Mapping and Insurance Exchange. I want to thank Amy and the Tennessee team for the invite to chat with you all today. So FEMA is committed to efforts that reduce flood risk and help close the flood insurance gap to improve the delivery of flood hazard data and provide greater access to flood risk information. But we recognize that none of these are really possible without providing top-notch support to FEMA's customers. So what we hope to do today is to share with you a little bit about the FEMA Mapping and Insurance Exchange Customer Care Center, help you recognize that we're a valuable resource for you and the folks that you support, and explore a little bit about how we can work together to strengthen our communities. So I want to start out with a quick introduction of myself, and then I'll turn it over to Erin to introduce herself. Again, my name is Matt Reed. I am a senior manager at the FEMA Mapping Information Exchange. I've been supporting customers for over 16 years now. It is really important to me that we provide really top-notch customer service to our stakeholders. Over those 16 years, I've heard many stories about how folks are impacted by flood, and really want to make sure that we're connecting them with the resources so that they can understand their risk and make informed decisions about how they protect themselves and their lives that they built. So I'll turn it over to Erin to introduce herself.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for having us today. My name is Erin Walhout, and I'm a senior program specialist here at the FEMA Mapping and Insurance Exchange, or as we call it, the FMIX. I have a background in geology and geophysical engineering, and this year is actually going to be my third year supporting our stakeholders. So I'm, again, very happy to be here and talk to you about how you can use the FMIX to strengthen your community.
All right, so let's dig in and meet the FMIX. So the FMIX supports people who have questions about the National Flood Insurance Program. We provide the full range of information that customers need to make informed decisions about their flood risk. Although the contact center has provided flood mapping information since way back in 1999, we recently combined our mapping and insurance contact centers in 2019. We did this so that we can provide a single customer care center, which offers each caller more information and a better experience. So with one call, folks can now get the information that they need for both flood mapping and flood insurance, as well as floodplain management and mitigation topics. Our knowledgeable staff provide one-on-one support to FEMA's customers who need help with understanding the NFIP. Many of our representatives are certified floodplain managers, like many of you, as well as we have several flood insurance specialists with over 20 years of experience. The FMIX helps over 12,000 customers each month, ranging from property owners to insurance agents to surveyors and local officials. While our top priority is to service our customers, we don't stop there. The FMIX also helps the larger FEMA program understand its customers and their needs by using data from those 12,000 monthly interactions. The customer insights that we derive from that data, we hope informs changes to FEMA programs and how it engages with communities and property owners to provide improved processes, products, and services. So you may be asking, how do you get in contact with the FMIX? Well, you can get to us by 3 ways. The first way is by giving us a phone call at 877-336-2627. You can also send us an email or chat with us online, and you'll see those contact information towards the bottom right of the screen. So we are also open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Anyone can, of course, contact the FMIX. In fact, our contact information is pretty easy to find through basic internet searches. It's also highly visible on FEMA.gov, floodsmart.gov, and we're also the main point of contact on the MAP Service Center website. So now I'll turn it over to Erin to talk a little bit more about how we support the state of Tennessee.
So the FMIX can support you and your community in a variety of ways. Let me give you an example. Have you ever had a conversation with a property owner after they had applied for the letter of map change and wanted to discuss their flood zone determination? The FMIX can help clarify FEMA's determinations and connect customers with subject matter experts. Let's talk a little more about our current customers. So in reality, they're anyone interested in general flood-related topics. We receive questions from across the nation, including Guam, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and even American Samoa. We receive the occasional international call as well. About 70% of our customers are property owners, and others can include local officials, insurance agents, and engineers. We serve a lot of the same people that you do, and some areas obviously generate more conversations than others. Last year, from October of 2019 through April of this year, we received a total of 3,505 inquiries from Tennessee. Davidson County had the highest of that volume with 637 inquiries. That was followed by Shelby County with 438, Hamilton County with 297, and Knox with 266. Our property owners are our top customer type and typically account for about 70% of total contacts from Tennessee. Surveyors and engineers account for about 8% of inquiries, and insurance agents account for about 8% as well. We find that most of our customers' journeys start with conversations about the mandatory purchase requirement. We often hear from property owners after they receive a notice from their lender saying that their structure is located in a high-risk flood zone. Customers are often confused and sometimes caught a little off guard. They're looking to seek clarity and guidance on what steps to take next. So the FMIX empowers our customers to act with information and resources. Lenders frequently include the letter of map change process as a potential path forward for property owners if they disagree with the high-risk flood zone determination. We actually suggest that customers consider their risk to flooding. So we expand the conversation to include reducing flood loss, and we encourage the purchase of flood insurance. Flood insurance policy requests include conversations about the renewal process, discussing existing information like their coverage, and raising general questions about cost and rating. We also support policyholders on their road to recovery after flooding event. We can guide disaster survivors through the flood insurance claims process and even connect them with mitigation resources for building a more resilient future. Mitigation and risk reduction topics are not a common request, but we'd like to discuss those topics more frequently in the future. Of the letter of map change topic, you'll see that's our largest request topic from the state of Tennessee over April 2020 to April 2021 timeframe. About 304 or 31% of those were data and fee requirements, 278 were case statuses, and about 152 were determination document conversations. Our flood insurance policy request types include information about renewal or even validating current policy information like provider, expiration, and coverage. We received 209 requests for a flood zone, and 72 customers contacted us requesting a completed copy of an elevation certificate. This chart demonstrates how we generally guide our customers. Our request and resolution types are an overall summation of the customer's interaction and don't necessarily identify multi-tiers or facets of the conversation. So some interactions can include multiple resolutions like referrals to our MSP or our Map Service Center website, or answering their questions during the interaction. So you'll note that our second highest resolution for Tennessee is focused on the online letter of map change application. That can again include, data fee requests. That can include online or paper case statuses. It can even include customers who reach out to us for assistance with submitting the application. A lot of you are familiar with the fact sheet that mentions you can contact the FMIX for a Zone A BFE calculation. Because of the level of study performed for flooding sources in Zone A, FEMA doesn't establish BFEs in those areas. So the FMIX can't directly provide a BFE calculation. If one's not available through another source like a state or federal agency, we'd first encourage you to submit a letter of map change application and request an in-house calculation. Our analysts will use the best available resources and attempt to calculate the BFE. A note on that is because the best available data may not be as detailed as what's available through the state and federal agencies, this may lead to a higher estimated BFE. So as we just highlighted, we may refer customers to you as well. We have access to a few FEMA-owned systems like the Community Information System. We use this to provide contact information to floodplain administrators, but we can't update the system or unfortunately provide details about your community assistance visit or details on repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties. Some of our more common referrals back to the community are listed here. That can include completing the Community Acknowledgement Form or the CAF. So we'll refer back to floodplain administrators because Section A requires a signature for requests involving fill placement, and Section B requires a signature for properties located in the regulatory floodway. So Section A will cover things about the project. So either the completed or the proposed project meets or is designed to meet all of the community floodplain management requirements, including the requirement that no fill be placed in the regulatory floodway, that all necessary federal, state, and local permits have been, or in the case of a conditional LOMR-F, will be obtained. Section B covers properties located in the regulatory floodway. So it's a property that's been inadvertently included in that floodway. And you as the floodplain administrator would be acknowledging that no fill on this property has been or will be placed within the designated regulatory floodway. So your community is a special place. The FMIX is here to support you and bolster the conversations that you're having locally with your community. But as the subject matter experts of your community, we'll often refer customers back to you for local insights. Customers may want to discuss local flood projects or even historical flooding events. We also receive calls from customers who may benefit from an in-person review of the flood maps. This can include customers that don't have access to computers, that may have a visual impairment or some other disability that could be best served in person. They may also just want to connect with a local expert to reinforce their understanding of a topic. So just as customers might want to check in with their local experts, they may also want to fact check or reinforce their own understanding and call the FMIX after having a conversation locally. Floodplain managers can use the FMIX to build trust and increase the power of their messaging. In 2018, for example, we had quite a few customers contact us from Harris County, Texas about the community's higher standards. These included a new regulation that increased the freeboard elevation above the elevation of the 500-year floodplain. So customers were contacting us to verify if this was allowed, and we were able to reinforce the community's messaging. We also educated customers about how FEMA sets minimum requirements for floodplain management, but encourages communities to go above and beyond and set higher standards. So this is especially true in communities like Harris County, which have seen devastating losses from flooding events. The FMIX can support your community by providing valuable resources. This can include insurance resources like agent referrals for property owners who wish to obtain a policy. It can include floodplain management resources like technical bulletins. We can assist with answering questions on MT1 applications or the letter of map change, additional data requests or determinations, and we can provide general assistance for MT2 cases, so your letter of map revisions and your conditional letter of map revisions. And for more detailed questions, we can even connect you with an MT2 case analyst. We can have conversations on hazard mitigation options. We don't have detailed conversations on the types of funding available to specific communities, but we can provide fact sheets and other resources on mitigation options. We can also refer customers to the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Grant section on the FEMA.gov website, which will go over types of grants, eligibility, and even how to apply. And if necessary, we can connect your customers with community officials or the state hazard mitigation officer for more information. The NFIP requires minimum compliance with floodplain management regulations to remain a participating community, but always encourages higher development standards. So our agents are happy to discuss those minimum development standards in special flood hazard areas and have increased conversations about risk. So We actually commonly encourage speaking with local floodplain management officials to discuss permitting, higher development standards, and building codes.
Occasionally, a customer interaction is too complex to solve with just one conversation. So it's important to us that we listen to our customer's journey and determine whether further research or escalation or pointing them to another resource is required. So to facilitate that, we've built partnerships with several other departments across the agency, such as the flood insurance advocate, underwriting, or our technical subject matter experts. And if our agents determine that a customer would be benefited by connecting with another department, then we make that happen internally and ask that they help resolve the customer's concerns. This includes connecting customers with contacts at the FEMA headquarters level or at the regional level. In some situations, you or your community members may require data to solve a problem. So what we do is we help connect customers with resources in addition to those technical experts. Some of these data requirements could be a meets and bounds map, HEC-RAS models, or data collected during the flood insurance process. Other examples could be MT1 or MT2 applications, many of which Amy was talking about in her previous discussion. So while the FMIX cannot provide this data directly, what we can do is help connect you with those resources, such as the FEMA Engineering Library, to request or in some cases directly download the required data. Two ways of obtaining data, flood risk data from the Engineering Library are through the Flood Risk Engineering Library or FRISEL tool, as well as the external data request. Last year, the FMIX received 1,500 requests about obtaining flood risk data from the Engineering Library. While we are not the FEMA Engineering Library directly, we do have connections to various parts of the program and can serve as a connection point for you and your customers. So since we've been talking about data, I'd like to share a resource that could save you some time in requesting data from FEMA. So I want to talk to you about the Flood Risk Study Engineering Library, or FRISEL. It can be located at the URL in the bottom right of the screen. From there, you'll click on Tools and Links and then search Engineering Data, where you can find publicly available information. This data is often used to support local processes, such as understanding how flood hazards are impacted by transportation projects and other types of development. Public access to engineering data in the FRISEL is only available once a flood study and the associated maps and texts are updated and finalized. For accessing engineering data during the public review period, stakeholders should coordinate with the FEMA regional office. Information from other federal agencies, FEMA, state, local governments, public officials and private firms may have contributed to the current and historic flood-related data, including hydrology, infrastructure, hydraulics, land use, and other maps or documentation. This information may exist and provide pertinent information, but due to time and resource constraints, may not have been yet digitally cataloged. So when you're unable to find the information that you're looking for through the FRISEL tool, you can reach out to the FEMA Engineering Library and submit a data request. External requesters can acquire NFIP data from the Engineering Library through the external data request process. This aims to locate, duplicate, and redact effective NFIP data for external requesters. So really digging back into the archives to pull out the information that you need to support your project. This process does require fees for most items. There are a few exempt NFIP stakeholders, such as community floodplain administrators and other FEMA mapping partners and other certain government agencies.
Our name, the FEMA Mapping and Insurance Exchange, speaks volumes to the way that we can support you and your communities. We're more than just a floodplain management resource. We discussed a few mapping related resources and connection points, but now I'd like to highlight another part of the program that goes hand in hand with mapping and floodplain management conversations, flood insurance. So as previously stated, FEMA consolidated their mapping and insurance contact centers in 2019 to have a more holistic dialogue about flood risk. This includes mitigating risk and discussing insurance options. So one example of the link between the two conversations is driven by the mandatory purchase requirement. Structures in high-risk flood zones with loans, including mortgages from federally regulated lenders, are required to have flood insurance. Often we find that customers begin their journey with the NFIP because of this requirement, then contact the FMIX for guidance. So we begin our conversations by discussing risk and recommending flood insurance coverage regardless of the flood zone. Where it can rain, it can flood. We can provide general agent referrals to a state licensed insurance agent to further discuss risk, obtain a quote, and even purchase a policy. And if the customer wishes to obtain a flood zone determination from FEMA, we advise them to submit a letter of map amendment application. Occasionally, these result in high-risk determinations, which furthers the connection between floodplain mapping and insurance. We would have a conversation on mitigation opportunities and even provide a community contact to discuss local options. One piece of information that we can share with current property owners is insight on their historic flood loss claims. The loss history report is a request for historical NFIP claims information for a specific structure. So customers interested in receiving the report for their structure can email us. We can send the complete instructions on how to request the information. And once we receive a request, we typically complete it within 7 to 10 business days, depending on the size of the request. The FMIX received over 8,000 requests for flood loss history reports just in 2020. 33% of those requests came from Harris County, Texas, Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, and Nassau County in New York. We actually found that many communities require a complete flood loss history report as part of the application materials for hazard mitigation assistance. In October of 2019, we began receiving an influx of requests for loss history reports from Houston, Texas. We identified that the increase in volume was actually driven by a flood mitigation assistance grant application. And in partnership with FEMA, we were able to prioritize the loss history research needed so that all applicants would receive their loss history reports before the application deadline closed. We also received several flood loss history requests to support mitigation grant applications from Jefferson Parish in Louisiana. The flood loss history report is free, and in addition to being helpful for grant applications, it's also a great conversation starter about mitigation. So it can provide insights for current property owners that can increase their understanding of previous flood events and help empower them to make educated, risk-based decisions. Nassau County, New York is using the loss history report in their floodplain management practices. The county actually requires a flood loss history report as part of the community's permitting process. Right. And this slide again is talking about, oops, go ahead, Matt.
Thanks, Erin. Just this slide here highlights the various loss history report requests supported by the FMIX. And so as we wrap up today's presentation, I hope you've learned a little bit more about the FMIX and how you can leverage it in supporting your day-to-day as well as your customers. So on this slide here, you can find our phone number, email address, and website, which links to our live chat channel. As a quick reminder, our hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Erin and I would like to thank you for joining us this morning and look forward to hearing from you and your communities as you reach out to the FMIX in the future. We are happy to answer any questions that you may all have.
So we've got one question here in the chat from Roger Lindsay. Is it possible for the community responsible for the floodplain management to have access to flood loss history reports?
So I believe that just due to different federal privacy regulations that the loss history report needs to be requested by the property owner. They can disclose that to the local community if they wish, but typically it's something that does need to be requested by the current property owner. There is a tool that the NFIP and FEMA uses called the Pivot or PART tool. And it is available, I believe, for community officials to access and view different information in their community. I'm not sure if, Matt, if we can provide that link in the chat box.
We can certainly follow up with resources available.
Any other questions for the chat box for Matthew and Aaron? Jennifer Nolan asks, is there a way to get the PowerPoints from today emailed to us? Yes, I will be sending the PowerPoints out to everyone as PDFs along with the certificates once we're done. Any other questions for Erin and Matt? Well, all right. Well, huge thank you to both Erin and Matthew for sharing that. That was super informative. A lot of great information there. And again, if anybody thinks of any questions after the fact, feel free to reach out to me or the information they shared, and we can get you guys more info. So for our last speaker of the day, we have Mr. Andrew Brown, who works with the part of the letter map change team at FEMA. So I'd go ahead and invite him to share his screen and come off mute.
Hello, yes, thank you. Hope everyone can hear me. My name is Andrew Brown. I am with Northwind Resource Consulting team, who are FEMA's MT1 National Services provider. I am the regional manager for FEMA Region 4, and appreciate the opportunity to be here to build off of some of what was said earlier, get into some additional details specific to MT1 case processing, and hopefully help with a target for community officials, some common questions, things that we see that can be helpful for communication to your constituents. So LOMACs and their purpose, some of this was mentioned before. LOMAC's a letter reflecting official revision or amendment to the effective firm. And in order to remove the property from the special flood hazard area, FEMA must issue a LOMAC. Why would someone want a LOMAC? Typically, it deals with the federally backed mortgage purchase requirement of flood insurance, affecting owners of property within the special flood hazard area with federally backed mortgages. LOMAC removal is issued. It does remove that mandatory flood insurance purchase requirement and can help property owners be eligible for lower flood insurance premiums or have the option not to purchase flood insurance dependent on the dictate from the insurer. Some definitions for letters of map change. There are two tiers. I'm going to be focusing on MT1, which is LOMAs, LOMR-Fs, and then CLOMAs and CLOMR-Fs. MT2 tier is LOMRs and CLOMRs and in physical map revisions. I also want to highlight eLOMA, which is a part of the MT1 that I give a little information later, where engineers and surveyors can become licensed professionals and issue their own determinations for applications meeting certain criteria. And the difference between MT1 and MT2, broadly, MT1 are bounds to the effective maps and flood insurance study, whereas MT2 are more complicated technical changes, new development, and the intent there is to physically revise the maps or conditionally provide comments for larger scale developments or changes to flooding sources that would change their hydraulic characteristics, and update the flood insurance rate map, flood insurance study for a portion of the county, the community. They do result in that official revision to the effective firm, whereas MT1s do not result in physical changes to the effective firm, and it is on a property level, in the ultimate goal to remove that insurance requirement, provide certainty as to the flood risk for individual property owners. So briefly touch on some of the information for letter of map amendment, which Amy went over earlier. Existing structure parcel of land not elevated by fill. It's a comparison of the lowest adjacent grade or lowest lot elevation to the base flood elevation, and would remove that insurance requirement. There are conditional requests for proposed structures, and for letters of map amendment that have the subject located within the regulatory floodway, there is a special determination type called LOMR-FW with some slightly different requirements for the community acknowledgement form. This is an example of the LOMA document that was displayed earlier. Just wanted to highlight a few areas. You can see the community information with the effective map panel and flooding source. A legal property description. All of our determinations are tied to a recorded property deed or subdivision plat. That will help to make clear what the subject of this was. You'll also see, for informational purposes, the street address and an abbreviated legal property description here. As we know that street addresses can change, all of the determinations are tied to a legally recorded document 4 years in the future. Also highlight the additional considerations. There can be a few of them. They will summarize on the first page, and then in subsequent pages provide additional information as to what that actually means. For meets and bounds areas, you'll also see a specific meets and bounds description included in the legal property description on page 2 due to the size and amount of wording. It carries over to the second page, and that's intended so that you can define it, you can follow exactly each bearing and distance of the subject that is evaluated in that specific determination. Letter of map revision based on fill, as was stated earlier, involves the placement of fill to elevate a structure or property or portion of property that was naturally below the base flood elevation to above. It is the same analysis of the lag or low lot elevation to base flood elevation. It has the same outcomes of removing mandatory purchase requirement for removal determinations. It does require community approval via the community acknowledgement section A to certify to the specific wording and compliance with the federal regulations, as well as any local regulations above the minimum. Also, there is a fee for the review. And the LOMR-F document looks very much the same. It is the same formatting with the same data items. You can see some different additional considerations may apply in this case, involving future construction for areas where fill was placed on a property to make sure that future construction is compliant with the regulations. But broadly, a very similar document. For conditional determinations, they are actually not determinations, they are comment letters from FEMA stating that the subject, a parcel of land or proposed structure, that would be elevated by fill would or would not be inundated as proposed based on the specific information provided for the review. It is based on the proposed lowest adjacent grade or low lot elevation provided and any building plans as well. It is not a building permit, although oftentimes it can be required as part of the local permitting process. It is merely an informational letter comment from FEMA based on those proposed plans. For an actual binding determination, a follow-up letter of map revision based on fill would be needed once finished construction is achieved to reflect the actual conditions and the lowest adjacent grade and specific site location to verify that it is a new determination for that. The forms used can be found on the FEMA.gov website. For MT1s, there is a specific packet. There is also an MTEZ form meant for letters of map amendment. It does not include fill information and is simplified documentation that can be submitted in lieu. So submitting a letter of map amendment, there are required documents. The copy of the effective firm panel showing the property accurately plotted. Also, a substitute for this can be the official National Flood Hazard Layer exhibit, along with a tax assessor's map, recorded subdivision plat, or property deed, property information form. The property information form is shown on the side here from the MT1 packet to give you an indication of some of the information. This needs to be completed by the applicant. The applicant does not need to be actually the property owner or homeowner. It can be a representative, a community official, a licensed professional, third party, just someone who is going to sign and attest to the accuracy of the information provided on the form. And they would be set up as the point of contact for the completed determination. For properties located within the special flood hazard area, which is the vast majority, also certified elevations are required. There is an elevation form that can be used for property or structure evaluations. Also, an elevation certificate can be submitted for structure evaluations in lieu of the elevation form. And a community acknowledgement form is also applicable for requests involving fill placement or located in the regulatory floodway. FEMA will respond within 60 days after the notification that all information has been received with a determination. It's important to note the caveat of after all information has been received. So it's important for applicants to provide all the requested items with the initial application in order to expedite that processing. It is not uncommon for additional data request letters to be required for components of the required documentation, which can delay processing for the applicant. And a portion of the MT1 elevation form here to show some of the information required for submittal. It's important to note number 2, for existing or proposed conditions, conditional requests would be based on proposed conditions, the proposed lowest adjacent grade or low lot, whereas LOMAs and LOMR-Fs need to be based on existing conditions. That is, the certified elevations provided on the form to be existing finished conditions. It is acceptable for instances where additional construction is occurring vertically on the structure, for instance. As long as the lowest adjacent grade is finished, it would be considered as existing conditions to qualify. Also make note of the elevation datum. There needs to be an indicator of the elevation datum that those elevations are referenced to in case a conversion is needed to the effective flood insurance study. It's always best to provide, for the licensed professionals to provide those elevations to the study datum, but if not, we can convert in order to have a valid comparison. And then a portion of the community acknowledgement form, section A, involving the placement of fill. There is wording in here. It's important to note about Endangered Species Act. For CLOMR-Fs, there is also a requirement to provide that evidence of compliance with the Endangered Species Act with the application, but for just LOMR-Fs, that is not needed to be submitted. The expectation, though, is that it is still, as part of signing the form, it has still been verified locally. But the applicant would not need to further provide that evidence with the application for review. Just a brief overview here of the costs associated. Letters of map amendment are fee exempt, but other requests do have associated processing fees that you can see here. Note too that there are differences between online requests and requests submitted via mail. So there is a financial incentive for applicants to submit online, but obviously you can submit whichever way is most convenient for the applicant. And briefly here showing the mailing address to be submitted. Online LOMAC obviously is through the mapping information platform. And then eLOMA is the alternative to the traditional LOMA process, also submitted through the mapping information platform, the MIP, by the specific licensed professional. And also an indicator as to why online LOMAC is beneficial. Applicants can bypass the step of mailing data in for a quicker submittal, quicker turnaround, receipt of correspondence. You do get that case number quickly, and can use online LOMAC to save your information, upload documents as you have them ready, and submit when they're all compiled. User-friendly interface. Also, it's convenient for frequent applicants. These would be licensed professionals, engineers, and surveyors, often to manage and track the multiple request status. Also, easier and more rapid communications for your caseworker, and monitor application status in real time. Wanted to describe eLOMA. It is done through the mapping information platform, web-based system for submitting and issuing simple letter of map amendments by licensed professionals. These would be licensed land surveyors, professional engineers, and the National Flood Association certified professionals. It is designed to replace the traditional process for simple LOMAs. There is an audit procedure associated with it, so that first-time requests or first-time LPs will be audited, and then after they have demonstrated that their basic competency with the process, there is a random audit basis thereafter, with a 5-day turnaround time for audits by our team. But unaudited eLOMA determinations are instantaneous. Upon submitting the application, you receive the determination instantaneous. It is an official LOMA determination that would be able to be forwarded to property owner or other interested parties as soon as it is completed. There are instances where it cannot be used. It is broadly meant for the simple submittals. So placement of fill on certain flood zones, V zones, or alluvial fan areas. You can't, it's not eligible for previous determinations to be submitted via eLOMA. Those would need a change, or they would need a specific review from our staff to evaluate any changes between them. And then conditional requests are also not eligible at this point. And some of the benefits of eLOMA, like I said, broadly, it is quick and easy, completely online, and eligible to for basic requests without fee. Also note that there is an incentive for eLOMA LPs that have demonstrated repeated understanding of that application process. They can become super users, which also affects the, it lowers chances of audits once they have demonstrated that competency. FEMA is planning to expand eLOMA usage by updating training modules, developing other learning opportunities, and as part of that, we're trying to provide outreach to interested parties. Have here the information of our eLOMA coordinator, David Mummert. I'll also provide my contact information. If anyone has any questions about eLOMA, either of us can be contacted to help with any of those specific questions that anyone might have. Some special considerations. I wanted to go over briefly the Zone A process with properties that are located in Zone A do not have a effective detailed study. So for these, we base our analysis. It is still a comparison of base flood elevation to lowest adjacent grade or low lot elevation. But the base flood elevation is determined based on the principle of best available data. So some sources of BFE data can be listed here. The important part is that with a submittal, if any of this is provided, it needs to have the supporting documentation as well, because we encourage that any local information be provided to remain consistent with what might be used for permitting or other reasons locally with the review. And it's important we do a reasonableness check to verify that it's appropriate to be used on a determination. Those can be local studies, information from a federal agency, also detailed topography, and oftentimes we'll have licensed professionals, engineer or surveyor, do their own engineering analysis specific to the site, as long as the methodology is reasonably supported with the supporting data. That can be provided and reviewed as part of the application. If no information is available, then with every case, we will determine a base flood elevation at the site, again, based on best available data that we have available to us. So the caveat is that these are always subject to review. We will revisit any previous determination if a follow-up application requests and can provide some data that might not have been provided previously. It will get evaluated in a new case, and a review of that data, reanalysis, whichever is needed, will issue a new determination that can revise the outcome. It can revise the base flood elevation shown on the determination used for analysis with the same outcome. Or we could issue a no change response validating the original determination. There are many different data sources available. Some of those may be available through the local community as part of ongoing studies that have not been incorporated into the effective map as yet. So that is always helpful to be provided with the initial application if it's available.
Andrew, a couple questions real quick before we proceed. So first off, Roger Lindsay asked, the community acknowledgement form contains a space for comments. What kind of information or level of detail is expected to be provided by the local floodplain administrator in the comment section?
Okay, yes, good question. There is no requirement for comments to be provided. The requirement is that the form is completed with the signature and date of the community official tasked with overseeing floodplain management. Additional comments can be provided that are helpful. The important part of the review is that they cannot be disqualifying for any of the wording shown on the form. And similarly, portions of the wording can't be crossed out. But any additional comments that the community official feels are would be helpful can be provided as long as they don't serve to invalidate that signature.
Okay, so long as they're not countermanding anything elsewhere in the form and are generally germane to the information contained, correct?
Correct, and like I said, there isn't a requirement, but if the community official feels like they would like to provide additional comments, they're more than welcome to.
Wonderful. And then the second and last question. So Lowell Schrader asked, are separate forms required for field projects that span multiple parcels owned by the same person, but are included on the same engineer site plan? So say a developer wants to build a singular engineering project that spans multiple tax parcels. Is just one form for that single development, or one each for each of the tax parcels?
Yeah, multiple parcels can be submitted in the same application, and those would have the same forms. They need to be within the same subdivision and general area, but it is quite common for developers to provide multiple lot requests for a specific subdivision. They can all be listed with specific low lot elevations or lowest adjacent grades on the same elevation form. They can also be submitted separate as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure. And another special consideration just to mention, I don't believe this affects many areas in the state, but Zone AO does have different submittal requirements. These are areas of sheet flow, typically found in the western states, but also can be found in areas with levees providing protection, or coastal areas as well. There are additional topographic data requirements. These Zone AO areas will be shown on the flood insurance rate map with instead of a base flood elevation, an average depth. And the topographic data provided should show that the structure generally is sufficiently above the flooding depth at that area, and that there are adequate flow paths to demonstrate that it is not at risk of flooding at the depth shown on the firm. And these are just some examples of how it may be mapped as contained through the streets or over land. For out-of-shown determinations, this is an example here. We do receive these. Obviously, if a subject is not mapped within the special flood hazard area, then there aren't elevation requirements, but we can, if it's helpful for the applicant, provide a determination to verify that either a structure or property, what have you, is mapped outside of the special flood hazard area, and those are known as out-of-shown determinations. They would still need to have a recorded property deed and tax assessors map provided, but wouldn't need certified elevation data also provided. I want to highlight as well that we do have FEMA has instituted a LIDAR program to use in lieu of surveyed elevations. There is a fact sheet that is available on the FEMA.gov site with a lot of the information. I just want to touch on a few. It was instituted February 2018. We know that there is a lot of LIDAR topography available locally, either as part of ongoing studies or for other reasons collected at the community or state or county level. If that LIDAR meets the USGS QL3 level or better, it can be provided in a mapping exhibit to use in lieu of certified field surveyed elevations. There are a list of exclusions here. Obviously, fill placement. There would need to be specific survey data depending on the date of LIDAR collection, et cetera. It needs to have a field survey along with it. It's not eligible for this program, along with these other, the list here. The exhibit has specific requirements that are listed here as well as on the fact sheet, and it needs to be provided in an exhibit form with a link to it publicly available on over the internet. The exhibit needs to be provided for our review rather than a link to access the data ourselves as part of this requirement. So, example of an exhibit. The caveat here is that because LIDAR is expressed in contour form, there needs to be an interval of accuracy applied to it based on the contours being at half the contour interval. So in these examples, you would look at the lowest contour touching the structure, in this case, 798, with half the contour interval taken from it. The lag would be 797 feet, just because of the accuracy limitations of contour mapping. So the intent for using LIDAR mapping is areas that are clearly above the base flood elevation. It has limited usefulness for the marginal areas that are closer in elevation to the base flood elevation. Those likely a LIDAR contour map wouldn't be able to demonstrate clearly that it is removable. And in those instances, we would not issue a determination, a non-removal based on LIDAR topography. We would request surveyed elevations. Also can be provided in a point cloud as an example given here. So just briefly, just touch on some of the common submittal issues. Incomplete forms, requests where we would need to request additional data are fairly common. As I mentioned earlier, it's helpful if the standard data items are provided with the initial request. It definitely expedites the process. Recorded documents with the county clerk are also needed, along with just generally missing data items, and those increase processing time. I want to highlight just briefly here as I wrap up with the MT1 technical guidance document. There was also an MT2 technical guidance document available on the FEMA.gov website. It's updated annually. I've linked on the to-date one from last December. It provides a lot of useful information and gives a similar overview as to what I have here with details that is very helpful for applicants as well as I think community officials. And this is my contact information if anyone wants to follow up, but I'm happy to take additional questions if there are any.